John O'Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is a really important piece of legislation. It's really important that we have this conversation in New Zealand about how our gambling venues are managed, because as so many of the speakers on both sides of the House have already indicated today, how we deal with this is a really important thing for New Zealand society. There is definitely problem gambling issues. There are also definitely issues surrounding the distribution of money that has been raised through gambling, and it's really important that we try and do the best that we can to get this right. And now the majority of the changes in this bill, the amendments to this bill, deal with gaming machines, pokies, or that are generally in bars, pubs and clubs. And I feel a little bit kind of like I just don't know how these things work. I do kind of know how they work, but I don't think I've ever put a single coin in one of those machines in my life, and probably never will. That's it's probably something that's a good thing. I guess I grew up in a family where that was never part of our culture. Might have been my Presbyterian father or something. Presbyterian minister father, but that's how it was. But I think some of the tenor of what we've heard today has been sort of almost indicating that we want to sort of wipe this out. And I guess even though it's not my thing, I don't think, as I say, I'll ever be into putting money into slot machines. If we were going to go around and start banning everything that I wasn't into, we'd probably have a pretty boring society for some of the others. So I'm not going to inflict that on people, and I believe that we do need to have things in place that allow people to make choices for their own lives. That said, as I said, we do need to have some pretty good guidelines around how these machines operate in our country. Now, this form of gambling through these Class 4 machines generates a significant amount of money, and New Zealanders spend about $700 million through these machines in these venues across the country each year. Now, what we want to do in passing this legislation is ensure that as much of that $700 million, or as much of the proportion of that $700 million, goes back into the local communities from which it came. And I think we just heard a very compelling proposition there in terms of the way that those statistics look currently around Auckland from the member opposite, Jenny Salisa, when she talked about what happens in terms of the amount of money that's sort of generated from this in Manukau East compared to the money that goes back into that community. And I think it's a very compelling argument as to why we need this legislation to ensure that that happens. Because as we've heard already this afternoon, a significant amount of that $700 million is already going to the 40% levy, which I guess comes back to the government coffers, which we would argue will benefit New Zealanders because it's money that's going to get invested back into New Zealand. But actually less than half of the money ultimately that comes through these machines will go back into local communities. And over time, it's something that I've heard a fair amount from people, I've got to say, a bit of cynicism about some of the gaming trusts, and a bit of cynicism about where the money goes to. You get accusations at times of it just goes to their mates or otherwise, and certainly over the years, members of the public, both in this role and in the role I had previously, have, I guess, talked to me about their concerns with that regard. And so it's important that we have these new proposals that are coming through in this legislation to make things more transparent so that the public can have confidence that the money is going where it needs to go. And so I'm very supportive of that, and I think it's critical that we do that. I think we've got to make sure that we, in those processes, limit the opportunities for crime and dishonesty associated with gambling. And we need to make sure that we are following through on what the purposes, if you like, of gambling are. We had Denise Roach talk about a number of those purposes already in the House this afternoon. And I just want to reiterate that, again, one of those purposes is to raise the money raised from gambling will be invested back into communities. So therefore, it's supposed to be operated on a not-for-profit basis. Sorry, I say that gambling, of course, of that which occurs outside of casinos. And so for the public to know that the proceeds are going to go back into the community is vitally important. And so to tackle this, we're going to restore the ability of Internal Affairs to cancel or suspend Class 4 licences as a penalty. I guess that's the stick part of the approach. It's important that we have significant penalties so that when operators of these Class 4 machines are in breach of the way they're supposed to be operated, if they're not being as transparent as they should with the way that they're dispersing the money, if it's not going back into the communities where it should be going back into, that we have appropriate measures in place so that the Department of Internal Affairs can take significant action and hold these people to account. But with any type of proposal, it's clearly important that we don't just have a stick, that there's also a carrot involved. And so there is provisions contained within this bill that will ultimately, for those operators who operate well, will have the opportunity to have a 3-year licence rather than the 18 months that is currently. Now, I've heard from other members this afternoon their concern over the mystery shopper type arrangement, where there doesn't seem to be a really good record within the industry of there being very good operators. And so I think what we need to do is incentivise those people to be better. I'm certainly not suggesting that everybody is doing this as well as they could. And in fact, let's face it, if all the operators out there were operating in a way that we really hoped that they would, we wouldn't be passing or putting this amendment bill through the House. And so we're taking those steps. We're ensuring by putting these things in place that we are going to do that. I think there's been some great work done by the committee. I'm not a member of the committee, but I understand that some good work has been done. They heard the 126 submissions, and as has also been alluded to this afternoon, came from a really wide variety of people. And I was encouraged to hear that the vast majority of the submitters liked the direction that this was moving in. I understand that not everybody's going to get everything they want from an amendment bill, and we've got many submitters who are coming from quite different angles, quite different ways of looking at this. But I think that we had such broad support for the direction of this bill suggests that we are making some good progress. And I want to commend the committee too for some of the suggestions that they have made to bring back. And it's a great, I guess, indictment on the parliamentary process. That when bills are brought forward, that they don't always just follow exactly the same form from the start to the finish. It's really important, of course, that we have the select committees where we get cross-party involvement, everybody gets involved, and hopefully we produce even better legislation than perhaps what the Minister brought in the first place. And so the strengthening of the description of the key person role within this, I think, is a really good initiative that has come from the Select Committee. Again, helps to improve the accountability, helps to improve the transparency, and ensures that we are actually achieving exactly what it is that we're wanting to achieve in this space. Mr. Speaker, I guess I just want to wrap up now by saying what's really important here is the public have confidence in the system that is in operation. That they do not become cynical about the way these funds are being distributed in our community. That in fact they can be confident that though let's face it, I think it would be personally think it'd be really great if so many of our community organisations weren't so dependent on money that was derived from this source, but the reality is they are at the moment. And while that's occurring, we need to ensure that those communities who are contributing to this source of funding are the ones that are benefiting from it. And so from that perspective, Mr. Speaker, I happily stand here, commend this bill to the House, and look forward to the committee stages where I'm sure there will be some more robust debate and perhaps some more fine tweaking of this document. Thank you.